Welcome to the Confidence Conversations podcast. I'm Gail from Enrichment Coaching, Clarity and Courage Coaching for Confidence, and I'm the founder and CEO, or actually I prefer Chief Enrichment Officer. I love to make a difference to those beliefs that you have about what you think you can and can't do. So the idea behind this podcast is to get the confidence conversation going, and I want to explore all the different views and opinions on confidence because there's loads out there. I'm going to be talking to lots of different people over the episodes and exploring their confidence. How do they know when it's at their strongest? How do they know when it's at their lowest? And how do they manage that? And I'll be asking them for their top tips or takeaways about how they enrich their own confidence. Now, just to be clear, these conversations won't have any fancy editing. They'll be organic and authentic, just letting the conversation flow. That said, I know I'll be curious, so there may be a hint of coaching and questioning along the way. So, let's go. So hi everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Confidence Conversations podcast. I'm really delighted today to welcome someone, we think we've known each other since like 2017, which seems like forever, literally forever ago. So I'd like to welcome Rob Liddiard today from Yapster. So Rob, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing about Yapster.
Hey Gail, thank you for having me. So I'm Rob Liddiard. I'm one of the co-founders of Yapster. I serve as the CEO. So Yapster is a mobile communication system for people working in what we would describe as frontline roles. So retail, hospitality, care, manufacturing, the sort of the key worker economy in COVID language. Most people, although everybody in society comes into contact with key workers pretty well every day, people don't often think about the technology that those folks do or don't have in their role. So most notably, people working in key worker roles often don't have a smartphone issued by their company. They've all got personal smartphones, but they also invariably don't have a company email address. And so what that means is it's actually really difficult for people working in those roles to feel truly connected to one another and to their organization. So Yapster is a mobile first secure alternative to WhatsApp that actually sort of allows companies to take control of that communication network to bring people together and hopefully make their work a bit more meaningful.
And we met right at the very start of Yapster, didn't we? When I was working for Ann Summers. I think most people that will listen to this will know that that's where I worked before. And you were kind of right at the very beginning of your Yapster journey, weren't you? And I think, we've kept in touch throughout all of that time, but I think for me, and when COVID hit, obviously your industry, the people that you serve with Yapster was the biggest hit, hospitality, retail. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was insane. So, well, it was interesting. I say we focus on key workers, but actually the key worker sectors that became really buoyant during COVID was sort of healthcare, primarily healthcare and then grocery retail. But actually we do primarily hospitality, non-grocery retail, do a little bit of care and some construction, manufacturing. And those sectors actually got shut down, particularly retail and hospitality, where we're probably strongest. So all of our customers pretty much went to zero or near zero cash flow all at the same time, and then stayed there with a few exceptions like Eat Out to Help Out for the best part of 18 months. It was, it's not something you would ever plan in a business plan, in terms of disaster recovery. You would never expect every single one of your customers to be forced to close by government for prolonged periods of time. I'll definitely be carrying the sort of PTSD of this for the rest of my career.
Yeah, God, and that's so interesting, isn't it? How we were talking about PTSD actually on a networking event randomly, I think the other week. And it must have been around 9/11 actually when we were talking about it, and just talking about how different it can be and how it affects people differently. And there'll be other people as well, people that are listening to this that have got that from COVID and from kind of where it's left us, I guess. And then in terms of what we're here to talk about in terms of confidence, what a massive knock to the confidence of you and your business, and how was all of that?
Well, so it's interesting when you technology is an interesting business, right? Because it gets better every day, every week, every quarter. If you keep working on it, you're coding the software and you're consistently expanding it and improving it. So on one level, that always gives you a cause for optimism, right? And optimism and confidence, I think, are often closely linked. But also, because the product gets better every day, that means every night you go to bed and it's the worst it's ever going to be. So if you were minded to be pessimistic about it and to lack confidence in what you're doing, technology would be the worst place to work, because unlike, say, a cafe chain that you might want to scale up and you dream of being the next Costa or Caffe Nero, one of our customers, or Pret, you could create one very small, perfect coffee shop quite easily. The challenge is actually replicating that and it not degrading over time, when you hire the wrong people and the quality slips or whatever. But creating that first perfect coffee shop is doable. In technology, it obviously gets better with scale. And so you kind of have to be confident and optimistic in order to keep going with it, because you always know that it gets better if you keep going. But what you usually think that your limitations are kind of your own. It's either just the fact of what you're doing and it just takes time to build something good, and so you can forgive yourself that. And a lot of technology co-founders are similar to me in that we've not done it before necessarily. Like I wouldn't pretend that I'm necessarily qualified to be the CEO of someone else's business. I've sort of inherited my chair by virtue of being sort of the first one on the bus. And therefore, I don't think I have spectacular imposter syndrome, but I suspect everybody in my chair would have some degree, because you are legitimately doing it for the first time, right? You never pretended that you knew what you were doing when you started the thing, when you took the job. You're just figuring it out, like as a baby learns to walk, I like to say. You just fall over and shamelessly pick yourself up and keep going. But you still do blame yourself when things go wrong, because you know that sometimes they're going wrong because your own inexperience. And so when the pandemic hit and it seized up all of our customer markets, it did put us in a really weird place, because you're trying to work out like what has legitimately happened to you and you had no control over, and to what extent did you contribute to your own problems, when you've had to like restructure the business or make difficult decisions to survive. You can ask yourself, you can drive yourself crazy saying, oh, should we have kept even more cash in the bank for a rainy day? But of course, like, my definition of rainy day now is different to my definition of a rainy day 2 years ago, right?
Totally. And God, I think nobody could have planned. I mean, I started my business just in the beginning, I guess, or it was just getting going, I guess, when COVID hit. And like you say, nobody is ever going to plan, to run a business in a pandemic. They're just not. Why would you do that? So look, Rob, I think there are a couple of things in that I want to do. But the first thing was this thing around optimism and confidence. And you talked, you talked that you think they're closely linked. So tell me then, what does confidence mean to you?
So confidence to me is the belief that you will prevail in the end. I don't know. So I like, there's a book by a guy called Jim Collins called, he's written a few, but the one I like is Good to Great, which studies why do companies that are, that start off being pretty good, what is it that makes them great? And he has this like massive data set and looking for patterns that in companies that statistically went from good to great. There's loads of concepts in the book, but one of them is about leaders and organizations having this I think it's Stockdale or it might be Stockton paradox. And this was a prisoner of war in the I think 60s or 70s, sort of Vietnam time. And this chap got put into a prisoner of war camp for like 7 or 8 years or whatever. A lot of people didn't make it through that experience, but he did. And one of the famous quotes that he came out with is that you must never lose heart or faith that you'll prevail in the end, whilst not being afraid to confront the most brutal facts of your present reality. And so for me, confidence is not the absence of the brutal facts. Like, we all have different setbacks to different degrees. We've all got different personal limitations. But it's this sort of this underlying faith that you'll prevail in the end. I think that's where confidence comes from.
Yeah, I really like that, this whole thing. And because you also talked about you know, you fall over like a toddler. And I love that description, because I think for me, some of this is about, you know, often we have to embrace our inner child, because as a child, you know, we'd say stuff that maybe we'd never say now, and we'd come out with things, you know, out of the mouth of babes, I think is the saying, isn't it? And but we held back because we do all of those shoulds, and I don't really like that word, because I think we put expectations on ourselves that we don't necessarily need to have. Okay, so tell me then, when you see your confidence at its absolute strongest.
Confidence at its strongest is usually coming out of adversity. So for me, it's about being sort of resilient, anti-fragile. I tend to feel most confident when something's gone wrong and it hasn't finished me, whether that's a personal relationship or something to do with work. Because I think that the one thing you can guarantee about life or business is that you're going to suffer another setback at some point. You just don't know when. And I think what you want to do is start to build up this belief that you have the ability to overcome those setbacks when they come. And so for me, that's confidence. That riding high is not the belief that nothing's going to go wrong. It's that nothing can truly take you down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And also, it's something that you referenced earlier was like, oh, you know, how you blame yourself when things go wrong. And I think blame has been something in the pandemic we've done a lot of, because we're questioning. And again, this is stuff we've never experienced before, and hopefully we'll never experience again. I'm sure we probably will, maybe not in our lifetime. I mean, who knows anymore? But you talked about, you know, blaming yourselves when things go wrong. So how do you, I guess it's a mindset thing, isn't it? Because it's easy to blame yourself, and your inner critic, you know, telling you, oh, what did you do that for? That was a really bad decision. Or what tactics do you use to be resilient so that it doesn't completely knock your confidence?
So I think I'm not a very organized person. I'm quite a chaotic person naturally. I think being organized, for me at least, is really important, because I think when I'm organized, it's easier for me to understand the things that I can control and the things that I cannot. If I don't organize my working week, then I will be behind. Now, I'll be behind if I do organize my working week as well, right? Because there's more to do than there's time to give. But it means I'm consciously behind on the things that I chose not to prioritize. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right. So when I fall behind on things that I chose not to prioritize, then that's sort of like empowered failing. When everything's reactive, everything's hitting your inbox, everything's hitting your calendar, you're doing a bad job of everything at work and at home, then it's harder to endure, to overcome the setbacks, because you do feel personally culpable then, right? Because you know you've sort of conspired in your own downfall. So that's really important to me. Like, my business, Yapster's a relatively well-organized business, I would say, even though, and they say companies inherit the qualities of their founders often, but sometimes they inherit the sort of anti-qualities of their founders. You know, like how parents often raise their kids to be profoundly different to them, and then they give us a whole different bunch of issues to the ones they grew up with, sort of inadvertently. I think there's often something similar in companies. So yeah, it's not a very sexy reply, but it's a sincere one. It's about forward planning, and then being honest with yourself that you're not, you know, superhuman, and, you know, some plates are going to smash. Just make sure you're dropping the right ones.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We all spin. When you run a business, you spin so many different plates, don't you? That you're like, yeah, do you know what, if I drop that one, I'm not too bothered about that one. I never really like the pattern on that one anyway. Just let it go. Yeah. Just let it crack on. And then I'm really interested in imposter syndrome, because this also came up a lot in the pandemic, and it came up a lot with my clients as well. And I did a little bit of research actually around kind of, you know, the difference between what is imposter syndrome. Do we truly feel like a fraud, and that's at absolute identity level? Or is this self-doubt, which is probably more related to kind of a task or things that we think we can or can't do? When does this imposter syndrome feeling kind of kick in for you?
Well, being a founder is a strange thing. It's different. Like, I think when you are employed and you're appointed to a role, then you often have to put yourself forward as believing you're capable for that role. your CV's checked, you're evaluated, and everybody concludes that you are correct for that role. And I think that is a fertile ground for imposter syndrome. Being a founder is a bit different. Being a founder is more like I mean, it's sort of more organic than that. And so it's more like getting into a relationship. It's more like becoming a parent, you know, like it's not as profound as those things, but it's the best analogy I've got. And so all that you really owe your stakeholders, be they employees or investors or the customers, is that you didn't lie to them on the way in, and that you've given it your damnedest all the way through. And if you've done that, then there really isn't any reason to feel an imposter, because you only ever promised to be yourself to begin with, right? So it's a real luxury in that sense. It's different. I think when you're employed or anything in life where you put yourself forward, I guess, fitting yourself into those sort of pre-existing sort of boxes in order to access the opportunity, then I think the opportunities for imposter syndrome are much more rife. One of the reasons I love the sort of entrepreneurial life, even though the uncertainty and the stress can be crushing at times, I find it very liberating. I started my career as a lawyer, actually, a corporate lawyer, and it didn't come that naturally to me. Like, I was just about clever enough to like pass the exams and get in and talk my way into a decent firm. But it wasn't something that I love to do. I don't have amazing personal organization and attention to detail, as we discussed. And so that job, I probably felt more of an imposter than I do now. I remember feeling really chronic stress when we were working on transactions where I felt like if I let the client down, I felt like I might let the client down. And I didn't know for sure that I could not let them down, no matter how hard I tried. So that's probably the closest I've ever felt to imposter syndrome personally.
It's really interesting with this whole employed thing, because you're given a label, aren't you, through the mere fact that you have a title in an employed role of who you are, and then there's an expectation that comes with that label and that title. And I think you're right. I've not heard it described like that before. I really like that. And I think you're right. As a founder of a business, your expectations are your own in some ways, aren't they? Okay, so I know if you're running a slightly bigger business, you might need investors. You've got those that you need to please. But your whole thing of, you know, don't lie on the way in and do your best all the time. If we just remember something like that, I think that's really key. And if you're in an employed role, do you know what? I think and if you're feeling imposter syndrome, there's a little bit around just acknowledging it and accepting it, and trying to move on and trying to do your absolute best all the time. The same thing, but I think that often in an employed role, we're constrained by the labels that we're given through a job title, and then the expectations and all the vetting, as you put it. It's a great analogy. I love that. So what about when your confidence is at its lowest then? How do you know that your confidence is really low?
Can't sleep. I mean, fear, you know, like, so I, you know, you do, the definition I gave earlier is the faith that you will prevail in the end. You don't always know that you're going to prevail in the end, right? Like, faith is a fascinating thing in that, like, it's often unprovable. And so your faith can be shaken. So when you're experiencing extreme adversity, self-induced or externally induced, it's totally human to say, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, those are the times where you then think you feel very small, you feel pretty vulnerable. And you just have to, I mean, everybody's different. Everybody's got their life configured in different ways. The way I deal with that is I'm very lucky. I'm married. We talk about these sorts of things. You might have a coach, you might have a therapist. You know, you need to be able to talk about what you're experiencing so that you can decouple your sense of self from the situation that you're in, because actually, you know, it can all come crashing down around you, and in all likelihood, the sun's still going to rise tomorrow, right? You know, and the rest of the world is going to go on, and nobody's really going to care that you lost your business. Just go get a different job, you know, like, just move on. People all the way through human history have endured like mind-bending adversary. You know, I mean, you just look at pictures from war zones, whether that's sort of Britain in the 40s or, you know, parts of the world that are war-torn now. You'd never wish it on anybody. What's interesting though is when you look at the photography of those places, quite often you see kids like playing on bomb sites, right? Because the human spirit is such that after a setback, or once you have experienced the initial adversity, like our psyche sort of normalize, we sort of normalize the adversity. And as long as it's not variable, if it's persistent adversity, it's amazing. The human spirit's an amazing thing, how you sort of, you adjust to it and accommodate to it. And then suddenly you can sort of start to find some joy again, you know, and hope again. And so for me, it's just about, you just got to be able to talk to somebody about the adversity, like get yourself some perspective that decouples you from the experience, you know, and then go dance on the rubble.
Yeah, I love that. I think, oh God, it's so true, isn't it? And people will be going off, and when they see those pictures now, they'll be looking out for those kids kind of dancing in all the rubble. But I think even in the pandemic, we've had those moments, haven't we, of, oh God, this is, you know, and it's a small thing, isn't it, compared to war. I know a lot of people have lost their lives, and it's been really sad, but you are right, sometimes getting a bit of perspective, and that perspective sometimes has to come from somebody else, because you can't always do that yourself. No. And just to see things a bit differently. But I think even in the pandemic, we've all seen a little bit of joy. And at the time, it's felt like, oh my God, am I ever going to get through this? But then it comes back around, and you go, oh, well, actually, well, what's come out, I guess probably one of the biggest things that's come out of this is how we're all working, and how we're working differently, and less people are traveling, and, you know, there's a better work-life balance for a lot of people. That's probably one of the good things that has come out of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, my dad said to me when I was little that one of the secrets to a happy life is reasonable expectations. And like, you could look at that one way and say that's quite depressing, but there's also quite a lot of truth in it, you know? So I always feel like whenever you're going through some adversity, like, it's probably rebasing your definition of happiness. And that means that you're statistically more likely to experience happiness next, right? Because life is going to look up, albeit from a very low base. And I think that's what a lot of us experienced through COVID, right? We experienced this very peculiar joy from something as simple as being let out of our house.
It's true. It's really true. We can go out for an hour. Oh, we can go out for a bit longer. Oh, we can get in the car and go somewhere.
Yeah, it's like, crazy, should we go for a walk? I mean, the number of, like, you know, my wife loves going for a walk, but it's not something that particularly motivates me. I just do it till the dog passes his breakfast. But like the simple joy of going for like walks is bizarre. But I think that's a good way of looking at broader life confidence and adversity.
Yeah, and a great way to ground yourself as well. Like, let's bring it right back. And I know that you know, some of the lockdowns would have been really tough for a lot of people, and I do get that. But you know, there were, and certainly the one after last Christmas was really hard, wasn't it? It was dark. It was, you know, nobody saw anybody. You couldn't go for walks. It was dark and it was raining and it was miserable. But this whole thing of reasonable expectations, how often do we talk about, oh, they have such high expectations, they have such this, and often those expectations are never met because we set them too high for ourselves. So I love the whole reasonable expectations. I really like that. Good advice from your dad, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, and I think you're right to keep qualifying the point about COVID. It clearly was very difficult for a lot of people. But if you look at the sort of the arc of human history, and you look at all the various adversity, you know, the human race has been through, or even just like individual instances. So I don't know if you've ever read Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, but, you know, like, we were all utterly miserable being locked up for a short period of time, and it clearly has caused very real mental health issues for lots of people. Mandela was in prison for 20 plus years though, so I mean, like, there are examples of people coming through worse, not unblemished. I'm not saying that it's like, I'm not saying that he would recommend living a life locked up, but, you know, you look at the positive impact he made on the world afterwards, and the sort of the generosity of spirit he came out of that situation with. And I think, again, it can allow you to find the good in adversity without sort of wishing for it.
Definitely. So, Rob, then tell me how confidence helps you in what you do.
Well, when you're trying to create something from nothing, like a new technology product, a new brand, you don't know for sure if what you're doing is possible. I mean, you sort of know that it's technologically possible, but will you be able to get the financing and have customers that use the technology, buy the technology, and then their employees use the technology? All of that is unknowable before you start. And so I think for me that the definition of confidence that I've given is sort of critical to being able to go on that journey. It's very different to starting a business where there are very few true unknowns, like starting the coffee shop at the local, on the local high street. Like, you can count the passing traffic of the place where you're thinking of leasing. You then can assume some sort of footfall levels or how many people are going to come into your shop. You might be wrong, but like you can de-risk that quite heavily, just because the model's fairly well known. When you're going to create something sort of completely new and there is no sort of footfall as such, you have to take a bit of a calculated gamble on yourself, on the market, on what you hope will be true. And so you really need confidence to do that. And again, it is the definition of confidence that I've mentioned, which is not that there will be no setbacks, but confidence that you'll be able to overcome whatever setbacks arise.
Yeah, and I think that's really true, especially when you're providing kind of a service business. So, I mean, in coaching, I certainly in COVID, and less so now, but you have those moments of, well, where's my next client going to come from? And I'm sure there are people that are listening to this that will have all of that. And often, like you referenced earlier, just talking to somebody and understand that everybody's feeling the same way, and that actually that's okay. It's all okay, and you will prevail in the end. Yeah, I really like that, because I believe confidence is a self-belief thing as well, that it kind of comes from within. But adding that kind of, you'll prevail in the end, it almost becomes a bit of a mantra, a little mantra that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, my recommendation to people would be to do the slightly dark thought experiment of what happens if this doesn't work, right? And you just keep following that through, and at some point you'll hit the 5th or 6th permutation of what happens if this goes horribly wrong. And if at the end of that you still think, well, the sun's still going to rise, the things that are most important to me in life will survive. And if the answer is they won't survive, then you have to think, well, what do I need to do to make sure they do survive? And you just carry on down that path of thinking. And ultimately, when you go far enough, no matter how risk averse, no matter how nervous you are, if you've gone far enough down all those permutations and you've closed off most of those risks, or you've sort of balanced and assessed them, you should then be able to come back to your starting point and say, well, I've mapped out everything that can go wrong. So in your example, in the event that you're in a service business and you don't know where the next client's coming from and it's not totally clear, the obvious thing to ask is, well, how long can I go with current number of clients that I've got, or maybe like far fewer clients than I've got, and what do I do if they don't come through? Do I give up, or do I take a second job, or do I ask my partner nicely to pick up the slack? Like, there's loads of different things you can do in that situation. I think once you've prepared for that, then you just yank yourself back to the present and say, okay, well, I don't actually want to have to take any of those contingency actions that I've just sketched out. So why don't I get on the front foot now and try and do something positive from a place of confidence? But you've just taken the sort of the monsters out of the closet.
And I'm a big believer in control the controllables as well. And you referred to that earlier, about the things that I can control. And in that scenario that you've just described, you go back to, well, what here can I control? What is within my control that I can actually do? And like you said, what's the first step that I need to take to make a difference? Great. So then, Rob, my final question is, what top tip or takeaway have you got about confidence for the listeners of the podcast?
My top tip to be confident is all around assessing the brutal facts. I think people are often looking for a sugar high for confidence. Like, where does your confidence come from? How do I be more confident? And they look at it through a positive lens. And I think they're sort of offending their own intelligence when they try and do that. I think if you can see a whole bunch of stuff that's causing you to feel fear, or I lack those skills, or I lack the network, or I lack this, that, and the other, I would just say, just lean into those facts and say, okay, do I need to do I need a coach? Do I need to study? Do I need some more experience? You know, like if the underlying thing that's chipping away at your confidence is in fact a real thing, then you need to fix that thing, not fake more confidence. Because if you fix that underlying thing, you will feel more confident.
Yeah,
right.
That's great advice, isn't it? And often you're right, you know, often I think people don't see building confidence as right. Let's address the things that you really fear. And I do work a lot with the kind of fear with my clients, you know, where we talk about, let's talk about the things that you're most fearful of, and we work through those, but we don't address those as kind of the brutal facts, as you put it. And I think that's really important. I think that's a great message for people to take away. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, thanks,
so where can our listeners find you if they want to connect with you?
So on Twitter, I'm at RJ Liddiard, Liddiard. If you want to look up Yapster, our website is yapster.info. Also on LinkedIn, you can just search me, Rob Liddiard, again, Liddiard. I can't think of any other places that you might want to find me. I post most of my stuff on LinkedIn, to be honest, because my community is a sort of business community. But yeah, I love connecting with people. I mean, Yapster, although Yapster is a messaging platform in terms of functionally what it does, the purpose is to make work more meaningful. It's about leadership, and so that takes all forms. So I just love meeting people that are leaders, whether that's hierarchical or whether that's more sort of cultural or community. So there's usually something we can find in common if people are interested in these sorts of topics.
Yeah, great. And we'll pop all the details in the show notes. So Rob, thank you it's great to chat, and it's great to get a different perspective on self-employment, COVID, and all the good things that come out of adversity, I guess. So yeah, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Gail. Thank you for having me.
So join us next time on the next episode of the Confidence Conversations podcast.